Hello everyone, this is Ashley Tucker from My Favorite Things. Today I'm sharing with you a Shaker Christmas card. This card features images from the Christmas cheer stamp set, so I picked out 4 of the images from that set and I put them in my Misty tool, and I stamped them with some black ink onto some Nina white cardstock, and I did double stamp those so that I got a really nice crisp image on each of them. I'm going to be coloring in these images using my Prismacolored pencils, and in case you want to know the colors that I'm using, I will be putting those numbers in the upper left-hand corner so that you can follow along. For the first color that I'm using, you probably can't see it very well. It's a very light color, and also I like to color very, very lightly when I use colored pencils. I use a very basic, easy to follow technique when I use colored pencils, and I really think that anybody could do it. For this technique, you first need to choose a color that you want to fill in your area with, and then you want to fill that entire area in with that color using a very gentle pressure. You want to go very, very light, and you also want to make sure that you're coloring in tiny little circles so that you don't get a lot of streaky lines in your coloring. After you're done adding that first layer of color, you can then take that same exact colored pencil and add even more layers on top of your first one to deepen up the color. For these other layers, you want to follow the same exact technique that you used for the first layer. You don't want to press down any harder. You still want to be using that gentle pressure. You're slowly building up the color. Keep in mind, though, that these extra layers don't have to fill in the entire area. You can use those layers to deepen up color just in certain areas so that you can get really nice shading. For example, on the hat that I'm doing on the bunny rabbit here, I filled in the entire area with the green color, and then I just deepened up the areas on the side, and that gives the illusion that it's a rounded shape. Again, I want to stress that when you're using colored pencils, you don't want to press down super hard. You want to use a very gentle pressure. Your dark, deep colors should come from a lot of layers being built up slowly, not from pressure. If you are struggling with these techniques and you're finding that you're just not able to build up the color, it could be the quality of the pencils that you're using. That being said, I do still think you can get really good results with lower quality pencils. I've used Crayola colored pencils before, and I can still get some decent images with them. You definitely don't need the top of the line coloring supplies to make a beautiful card that somebody will really love. I definitely want to mention that the video is sped up really fast for this coloring. I do not color this fast. I wish I did, but in fact, I colored these very, very slowly. And I think that's very important when you're coloring with colored pencils. You got to take your time with it. I don't know about you guys, but I find coloring to be very relaxing. I like to turn on some music and have my hot tea, and I just color for like an hour, and it doesn't even feel like an hour. I love this little fox guy. I think he's so adorable. Well, I mean they're all adorable, but I have really something about foxes. I always really like the fox designs. Notice how I'm really building up that color on the tail at the base of the tail, and that's just because it's right behind his body, so it's going to be more in shadow than the rest of the tail. If you're ever struggling with where to place your shadows, first of all, don't worry about it too much because we're just having fun making cards and it doesn't have to be perfect. But second of all, think about things that are behind things or things that are underneath things. If they're underneath, they're going to be in shadow, and if they're behind something, they're going to be in shadow, especially right behind. And if you want to go even further with your shadows and get really, really accurate shadows, think about where your light source is. Anything that's further away from the light source is going to be more in shadow. And I definitely don't get all of my shadows accurate every single time. Honestly, I don't really think about it too much. I just want to make a card and have fun and not stress too much. The person that you give your card to isn't going to pull it out and say, this isn't good enough because the shadows aren't where they're supposed to be. Now, for this little bird, I really wanted to color it like a cardinal because when I think of Christmas and winter birds, I always think of cardinals. I don't know if this bird is meant to be a cardinal, but really you could color it any way that you want and turn it into any kind of bird, except maybe a penguin. I mean, you could try to color it like a penguin, but I don't think it's going to work very well. Anyways, in order to get this to look like a cardinal, I first Googled some cardinal images because I couldn't really remember what they looked like. I knew they were red, but I didn't know where the markings were on them. So I just pulled up some cardinal images on Google, and then I was able to add the colors based off of that. As it turns out, cardinals are really easy to color. They're mostly red, their wings are a little bit darker of a red, and then they've got a little bit of black around the beak. You might have noticed when I was coloring that cardinal that I took a second deeper colored red and I went right on top of the first red with it. And that's a really great thing that you can do with colored pencils is you can layer colors on top of other colors. And I'm going to be doing it again here with the Christmas tree. When I want to keep my coloring very simple and basic, I'll just use one colored pencil to fill in an area, and then I'll take that same colored pencil to do all of my shading. But when I want to take it a step further, I might deepen up my coloring and add more layers with a different colored pencil. I didn't get too crazy with this because I did stay in the same color family. So for the cardinal, I used 2 different red colors, and for the Christmas tree, I used 2 different green colors. But you definitely don't have to stay in the same color family. Like for the Christmas tree, I could have added in a blue color, and that would have given me a totally different look, and it just kind of adds interest to your image. So that's it for all of the coloring. I know it was a lot of coloring, so thanks for hanging in there with me. I die cut all of those images out and I set them aside while I moved on to the next part of the card. Using 2 circle dies, I cut a frame out of some white cardstock. The circle dies that I used were 4.5 inches and 3 3/4 inches. And I took that 4.5 inch circle die and I also cut a circle of acetate. And I'm going to be gluing that to the frame to make the window for my shaker. I like to use liquid adhesive for this because it allows me a little bit of time to move around that acetate to get it perfectly placed. Next, I took the circle that was cut out when I made the frame, and I'm going to use some scissors and cut a wavy hill shape along the bottom of this. And because this was the circle that was cut out when I made the frame, it fits perfectly inside of that frame. And I'm going to glue that to the acetate with some liquid adhesive. I took a really long piece of foam tape and I folded it in half so that I had a doubled up piece of foam tape. And then I cut that foam tape down the middle so that I end up with a really long, thin piece of doubled up foam tape. In order to really easily curve this foam tape around the circular shape, I made sure to remove both sides of the backing paper before I started placing it, and this just makes it really easy to curve. And then I started placing it around my shaker window, making sure that I don't have any little holes for any of my shaker bits to fall out of. If I were to use much larger sequins, I might have made my shaker area bigger so that those sequins would have an area to hide beneath the snowdrift. But because I decided to use these small shaker bits, I didn't need as big of a shaker area. And of course, if you don't want your shaker bits to have the ability to hide beneath the snow in this design, you need to put your foam tape right up close to the edge of that so that they can't dip below. I decided to use these cute little snowflake pieces as well as some white micro pearls so that it looks like it's snowing inside of my shaker. And I closed up the back of the shaker with some After Midnight blue cardstock. Whenever you use micro pearls, make sure that you really press down on your foam tape because those are so tiny and they can get out of the smallest cracks. So you want to really make sure that your shaker is adhered. Once I was sure that it was totally secure, I used some scissors and I cut around the edge so that none of that blue cardstock is showing around the side. I made a 5.5 by 5.5 card base out of some natural cardstock from My Favorite Things, and then I took my tape runner and I adhered that shaker to the center of that card base. I pulled out those images that I colored and cut out earlier, and I'm going to adhere those around my shaker. First of all, I'm going to use liquid adhesive to adhere that tree right in the center, and then I used foam tape to adhere the fox and the bunny. And for the little cardinal, I decided to have him right up there on the top of the frame, and I'm going to use some liquid adhesive to glue him down. I love how it looks like the little bird is flying in to bring the star for the top of the tree. I decided to add a dashed line around the edge of my card base with a white gel pen. This is something I like to do with a lot of my cards. Now, honestly, I forgot to add my sentiment until the next day, so that's why the lighting is a little bit different here. So I stamped a sentiment from that same stamp set, the Christmas Cheer stamp set, with VersaFine Onyx Black ink onto some white cardstock, cut it down into a strip with a slanted edge on the left side, glued it onto my card with some liquid adhesive, and I did slip a little piece of doubled up foam tape underneath that right hand edge so that it matched the height of the shaker over there. After that, I flipped over the card so that I could cut off the excess paper hanging off of the side on that sentiment, and then this card is all done, and I love the way that this one turned out. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you really enjoyed today's card design and that it gave you some inspiration for your Christmas cards. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and I'll see you next time.